All right, here we are at another Ceph Developer Monthly for our APAC friendly folks. Like Sage mentioned, it should be a relatively short agenda unless we have people showing up or things that aren't on the list already. But I guess we'll just dive right into it and knock it out quickly. So you want to jump on that first one?
Sure. Yep. So the question is really about the REST API. So if you look at the pad, there's a pull request open that adds a REST API to Ceph Manager. I'll paste it in the chat here. So what happened was, well, in the beginning there was Calamari, and it was prescriptive in terms of having to install salt and a bunch of other random diamond, a bunch of other random stuff, and then there was a GUI on top, and it included a REST API, and nobody wanted to use it outside of Inktank because it was too prescriptive, and so there was basically zero adoption. And then we ditched the GUI piece. We still ship the API as sort of a separate piece as part of Red Hat Ceph storage, but there are very few consumers of that. I know it's more than zero, but I'm not sure how many more than zero. So originally when John did the Ceph Manager thing, he basically just took the Calamari API and just plopped it into the manager, mostly unchanged. I think he fiddled with the URL a little bit, just as sort of a demonstration that, yes, Manager has all the basic pieces you need to implement this kind of API as an endpoint. But it used Django. I think it was Django or Pylons. I don't know. Used something that didn't have a package in RHEL.
And Django and Boris, a couple of other things.
Yeah. So Boris basically re-implemented the API using Flask and then again using Pecan, because that was less work than packaging and then supporting forever after Django in RHEL. And so we have a pull request that basically adds a REST API that's different. I don't actually know. Do you know how different it is from the Calamari one? Is it similar? Is it just a reimplementation of the same thing, or?
I can't answer that definitively. It looks like it has many of the same pieces, and I believe without actually having tested or looked or compared all of the endpoints, that it's basically the same sort of shape as the Calamari one.
Okay.
The worrisome thing was that there were some things that Calamari did for long-running operations, like sending a request to increase the number of PGs and then looping back around to find out whether that actually succeeded. That were kind of tricky to implement, even given Django, and would be even trickier in a simpler web framework with less asynchronous nonsense going on. And I know John asked about that in the review, but I don't understand where that landed.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. So, all right. So that's and as far as people using it, we've told the teams making GUI stuff that they should use something with Ceph Manager. Right now they're like wrapping CLI stuff, so they're not really using it. So there's no user or specific demand yet on the Red Hat side, although presumably we want them using. It's probably easier for them to use a web like REST type API than Liberatos directly, but unclear, I guess. It depends on sort of what the scope is, and they haven't gotten too far. On the OpenAttic side, with SUSE, they are already using something, but they basically implemented their own API endpoint that's sort of like an API gateway, and then their implementation basically goes and uses Liberatos behind the scenes to go do the stuff on the actual cluster. And that link to that is also just posted in the chat. So I'm not an expert on again, I don't know very much about the new Pecan one, but I assume it includes all this basic stuff, right? Ceph status, list of pools and snapshots, erasure code profiles, OSDs, PGs, like it just exposes all this like basic stuff. I'm not sure it exposes RBDs, but that would be a pretty simple and good addition, presumably, to that API. So it wouldn't have this manage nodes using salt stack thing, I guess, obviously, but who knows what that does.
No, that's the OpenATIC does. In addition to getting some status out of Ceph, and it can also, through the OpenATIC API, can do things like create and delete pools and create and delete RBDs and things. So for each of those endpoints, there's a get. Well, for anything that's listed with a get and a put and a delete, it can actually manipulate those things in that RESTful way.
Okay.
The salt stuff, that wouldn't go anywhere near. We wouldn't want that anywhere near manager. That's because it can do, OpenATIC can do other bits and pieces. It can do something for managing iSCSI gateways via Salt and Deep Sea, which is like totally outside of Core Ceph and not
Okay. Okay, so there's that data point, and then the last thing is, so John followed up on the pull request with sort of asking why wasn't this discussed on Ceph Develop before this big thing was, but can't really blame Boris because he actually asked him to open the PR so they could comment on it. But I think that his larger point was that we haven't really discussed what API we want, and John is questioning whether we actually do want a REST API because we don't really have any users yet, obviously, because I don't have one, or people specifically demanding it. And if, even though people want a management API, it wasn't immediately clear to John that it should be a RESTful one. It could be, XML RPC or I don't know, whatever people use these, gRPC, whatever people use these days. I'm pretty ignorant of this whole field, I guess, of people building RESTful things with Python frameworks, whatever. It's not really my thing. So I don't have any strong opinion, except that there was a pull request that just came in to Redis Gateway like 2 weeks ago that was basically trying to add a management API endpoint to Redis Gateway because they were like, it's really can be easy to write automation and management tools if there's a RESTful endpoint, and we should just put it in the gateway because it's also already doing, HTTP stuff. And clearly it should not be in Redis Gateway. If we're doing that, it should be in Manager. So I think we need, I guess my feeling is we need something. Boris's pull request is basically ready to go. But I think it really comes down to who the users are going to be and what they need and want out of that API. So I was mostly wanted to talk to you, Tim, as a representative of the OpenATIC folks, to get your thoughts.
So I'm in a slightly odd middleman position at the moment because I'm insufficiently familiar with the OpenATIC code base right now. But so the reason that just for a little bit of background, OpenATIC did a REST API internal to OpenATIC for talking to Ceph at the time because Manager didn't exist yet, and there were what was it, there were things that were annoying somehow about the Calamari API. Now, and that the OpenATIC Ceph API is a Django thing at the moment because the whole app's Django, and I had actually thought to just sort of pick that up and drop it into Manager and see what happened. I haven't actually done that yet, but just as an experiment. And I had a little bit of email back and forth with a couple of the OpenATIC guys last night, my time, and some of the TLDR, they at some point need to move their REST API stuff to Ceph, need to be using a REST API in Ceph Manager, right? Because, for example, they want to get PG and OSD dumps, and doing it the way they're doing it at the moment, it will time out on big clusters somehow. And doing these sorts of things through Ceph Manager, through a REST API there is going to be a good fit. They also have a need for tracking long-running operations, which goes back to that thing that Dan said before about the current PR possibly not having something in there for that. I'm not sure what OpenAttic has in there at the moment for doing that thing itself. And the PR as it stands now could possibly be work as a replacement for OpenAttic for their API endpoints that are talking to Librados, provided it supports all of the pieces that OpenAttic is currently using, which I don't know.
And my guess is it has most of them, but not all, because it doesn't include RBD, for example.
Yep.
But my guess is that that's not a ton of work to like add more stuff.
Presumably not.
Yeah, and no more work to add it to the pecan one than to like port this whole one and plop it in. And there were issues with Django and Manager anyways, right? So yeah.
And I don't. And if the API inside OpenAttic were dropped from there and OpenAttic started using this REST API or something like it, I believe and hope that would be a relatively painless migration at some point. One concern that I have, and probably the OpenAttic folks have too, is timing. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm trying to do work on Manager at the moment, but like I said, I'm not deeply familiar with the OpenAttic bits at the moment, and I'm not sure how. I'm not sure if anybody else in the OpenAttic team has an enormous amount of time before the Luminous release to do stuff on this. So, again, without actually trying to speak for anybody else.
Yep.
And so one question would be is do we want this API to go in as is for Luminous and then fiddle with it more later, or do we want to hang back?
Yeah, well, I think I would like to have something in sooner rather than later, so that there's like an API that people can target and they can use for the basic stuff at the minimum. And when they want to add new things, great, we'll accept pull requests. And this is like such a isolated piece of the system that I'm like super happy backporting. If we start adding API calls, we could just backport all that stuff to Luminous, post Luminous if necessary. I'm also, we could also, since there's such a small number of users, we could also like have it in sort of an experimental unstably, give it sort of a quasi unstable status, so that we reserve the right to fiddle with it a bit before locking it down. Given that there are no users yet, and like the one user is the one that's going to be like fiddling and adding bits. But so I mean, my gut says let's just merge what we have. Probably most of these are going to be pretty easy to just map onto what the new one adds. We can add the RBD stuff and backport it if we don't manage to get it in before Luminous release. Although probably, I'm guessing it isn't all that much work to do it, especially for librd, since there's no additional. Yeah, I think adding the librd stuff into Manager should be really easy. Would be my guess, but I'm not the expert there. But I'm curious what the other. I guess A, are there other concerns, and B, well, I mean, John's sort of bigger question was, are we ready to sign up for creating a new API and like maintaining it and adding functionality and like as we go forward? And it kind of feels like we don't really have a choice. But to probably just want to make sure there aren't any dissenters, or I don't know.
From my perspective, and as Yeah, from my perspective and probably from OpenAddict's perspective, it's good to have a REST API in there of some kind, and OpenAddict will end up using something there or somehow. So there will be a user of this thing in some shape. My immediate concern was that if this and hey, pecan, cool, whatever, if it's got less dependencies, if it's simpler, yay, my concern is if this is a port of the Calamari API, just to make it simpler without further thought into what pieces various users might need and if this is the API that we want to maintain going forwards, if this gets solidified and declared as the thing, and we can't, like right now, without enough users to know whether it's the right thing, then I don't want to get painted into a corner.
Yeah. The thing there is that it's kind of a catch-22. Like we won't have confidence that we did get it right until we have users, but we won't have any users until we try something.
Yeah.
So
this is what API versioning is for, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's that, and we can sort of call this the quasi experimental API or whatever, RFC. I don't know whatever you want to call it. The first time around too, where we're sort of like telling people this is what we have. If you want it to be different, like tell us now, and we'll evolve it.
It seems like a reasonable goal to study how far it is from the existing OpenAddict API, so that it could be used as a drop-in. I don't know how much work that involves, and scoping the work would be a good thing to do, regardless. It sounds like.
I'm happy to try to figure out some of that and
That would be I think Dan's right. I think that would be super helpful, given that those are our only 2 data points right now. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we can sort of argue that if it's good enough for OpenAddict, it would be good enough for console. But
I guess my 2 questions are one question is, what's the delta between this and the OpenAddict one, and what are the gaps? And then 2, the long running operation question was an issue in the original Calamari. It may or may not have been sort of ported over to this, or maybe it just got dropped. I think maybe it just got dropped. So what's there? What should be there? I mean, we don't have to implement that immediately, but if there is something there, then we should make sure it's not totally wrong. Hopefully.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, I'll try to figure out what the delta between this and OpenAddict is, and post on the PR, post on the Devel mailing list.
Both probably. We haven't really discussed on the mailing list, so I would like to shift the discussion there, so that more eyeballs on it. Is that something you have time to do in sort of the shortest term, like the next week?
It won't be before the end of this week, but
that's fine. As long as we sooner the better.
Think days.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. And the other thing is John's out on vacation until the end of this week, I think. So probably want to get him back in the conversation at some point too.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's all that I have here. I guess the last thing is that there's the Ceph REST API endpoint. That's basically just a pass-through for the CLI API in an HTTP form. And that there was something similar in the Calamari API, just with a different endpoint that also just passed through those commands. I think probably in this, whatever this implementation looks like, we should still have a similar pass-through where we can just send monitor commands and we'll just get proxied straight to the monitor. Because then we can take the existing take the existing tests and just change the endpoint and run them through the manager. And then we can just remove Ceph REST API from the code tree finally. So it would be nice if that could get wrapped up before Luminous, so we have a little bit less proliferation of stuff.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else? Any other comments or questions or thoughts about REST? Nobody wanting to do gRPC instead or whatever? No. Okay.
Wash your mouth out with XML soap.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. Okay. I think that covers that. So thanks, Tim. Looking forward to hearing what you find. And then the other, then the only other thing I have on here is a Ceph config option annotation. So I've been putting together a list of like stuff that I've been able to think of that users run into that's complicated or hard to configure or just sort of makes Ceph harder to use or administer that could be not as hard and make the system more self-managing and easy to use. Sort of one of the things that we get from users and from customers and so on is just that Ceph is hard, and we're trying to like come up with all the things that we can think of to mitigate that. And so there's several things going into Luminous that are going to mitigate a bunch of like things that people have run into in the past, like crush rules for multiple device classes is going to be sort of done out of the box. You won't have to manually edit crush maps. Disk replacement, we're documenting clearly and fixing Ceph disk to make that a more streamlined process. There's going to be a manager endpoint that's just like a Ceph status, like minimal GUI that just shows, health okay and log messages, that sort of thing. Balancing a crush map, stuff like that. But one of the recurring complaints is that the config options, there are a million of them and nobody knows what they mean and they're not documented and it's never clear which ones you should be touching and which ones you shouldn't. And we talked about this like years ago about like annotating the config options with a description and having a command that will like dump the config options with the description, and so you can tell what the hell's going on. So I just want to resurrect that, and it's the kind of thing that like bang out on an airplane once you go write descriptions for every config option or whatever, once you sort of figure out what the schema would be. So I wanted to talk about that and get input on what properties are important for config options, which ones make sense, and how we should sort of box these in. So I'll paste the Etherpad in the chat. This is sort of an updated version of a proposal from CDS for Giant. I guess that's 2 years ago. Originally from Danny at Deutsche Telekom. So if you look, currently the config options have a few properties. There's the name of the option, obviously. There's a type that's like integer, string, signed, unsigned, float, whatever. Optionally, there's a validator function that you can have a callback that makes sure that's a valid config option. And there's whether or not there's an observer, indicates whether it's safe, and there's a default value of course. But mostly that's it. The descriptions for the options are comments in the source file, which is not very useful. So I want to expand that macro so that it includes all this other stuff, like a description, like a short one-line description of what the option is and what it does. I was thinking maybe a longer string that's like a longer, like paragraph length description. If there's sort of more information about that should be captured, we keep it right there with the option. That would be helpful. So I think that's pretty uncontroversial, probably. The new idea that I had that we hadn't talked about before was the idea of having having a level associated with the option. That's so options that users are expected to adjust would be sort of a low level, and then things that you probably shouldn't change would be a higher level, and things that are like only developers are expected to touch, those should be marked as such. So you can tell which ones you should just ignore, and probably just even hide those when you just dump the config options possibly. So that was, and then along with that, you could have a config option that is like, what level am I allowed to change? And so by default, you would only be able to change the, like the mid-level commands. And if you try to override ones that were above that level, it would just ignore it or issue a warning or something like that, until you change it to like expert mode or something like that, so that you can adjust the higher level options. So that's sort of the first thing I wanted to get feedback on to see if that makes sense.
I think that idea makes sense for having different levels, but maybe we don't need all 5 of them. Maybe we could just do with 3, the ones that users should change normally, ones that are for expert users, and ones that are for developers only.
Yeah. Yep, that's probably enough. I was trying to figure out how to stratify them, but okay. So associated with that though is when I did the similar thing with the perf counters, I sort of defined it. I did predefined values, but I put them on a scale of 1 to 10, so you could sort of have stuff that was in between if you needed for more granularity. Do you think it makes sense to do anything with that, or should we just like keep it?
I think we should keep it simple. I think we've seen with like our log levels that it doesn't really matter if we have a whole bunch of different values. We really just need one.
Yeah.
So Sage, I'll be the devil's advocate here. It's seductive and dangerous, I think, in a certain way, because right now, if you look in config ops, we've got something like 97 Blue Store options and I think 20 BlueFS options, and that's just a small subset of everything that we have. I think when you create levels like this, it kind of lulls you into a false sense of security by hiding a bunch of stuff from the user that they probably, you're right, don't ever need to touch, but it's a lot of additional things that theoretically a developer or multiple developers are thinking about, but in reality, is anyone actually looking at these? Is anyone actually making sure they're right? Maybe someone is. Maybe I am. Maybe Ben England is. Maybe other developers are. But I worry that it's kind of a way to shove everything under the bed, sort of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that does make sense, but I think that's kind of at least in my mind, that's kind of the intention. The reason why they're config options is you don't want to hard code them. But in certain cases, you do want to change them, right? And the idea of having these properties is like you sort of state your confidence that this value that I chose is the right one, and the user shouldn't need to change it. And if they do, then they should better think about it hard. Right.
Well, the ultimate goal in the end, right, is that Ceph does the right thing. The user doesn't want to set anything, or we don't want to set anything. We just want the right thing to happen. So I guess I would advocate that we try to approach all of these from that angle, kind of as how do we make Ceph do the right thing? And maybe that's a config option, but maybe it's not.
Well, I think that's a mentality. As we go forward, we should try to avoid adding new options, but instead have a general option that describes the intent of the user and then derive the behavior from that. Like replacing the million throttling things that control recovery rate instead with a single option. The user says, I want to devote this percentage of my throughput or whatever to recovery, and then figure out what to do based on that, right? That would be a sort of a good example of.
Yeah, that is kind of the same thing with all the memory that we allocate for different things, right? I mean, we've got like an internal Rox. We've got 2 different internal RocksDB caches. There's a compressed one and an uncompressed one. We have ONode cache in Blue Store. We have other things all over the other place. I mean, I was just talking to Igor about BlueFS cache on top of all the other caches. It's just there's we it's a lot of effort, right? But we could probably make Ceph smart about saying how to allocate memory for all this stuff.
Yeah, so I agree. That's like, but it's a separate goal.
Okay.
Like the goal right now is to take the like completely opaque all of nastiness and put some guardrails around it so you don't wander off into the weeds. Because heard stories from customers who are like looking at all the config options, being totally overwhelmed, having no idea what any of them does and just like setting them and then seeing what happened to their cluster and then changing another one and seeing what happened to the cluster. And you're like, that's like the worst way to spend your time, basically.
Yeah.
We could have another type like for test, or if we didn't put it under dev. I think if it was testing, then it's going to be dev, or we should have a category for test.
Mm-hmm.
What's the value in having a separate category for test versus dev?
I don't know. It's sort of, I don't know, just organization and.
So the things that are under dev, it's going to be like failure injections, and it's going to be like things that inject delays so that tests can see them, or just like weird things that are designed to make the code behave in a weird way so that you can make sure that your test a particular. I don't know. They all sort of seem. If there were a test category, I'm not sure that there'd be that many things that would go in dev and not test, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, maybe dev is pretty much
just
testing stuff.
Try to keep it simple initially. I mean, maybe when I'm actually going through and like looking at every single option and like putting it in a category, come up with something else. But
yeah, so
this is going to be.
What we want from this, I think, is that what would be great is if we could automatically generate the RC docs as well.
Yes.
Have a script that goes through and puts them in the right place. So we have a few pages in the docs with configuration references for different subsystems. So maybe we also want like a category field for an option.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the next. If you're looking at the pad, the next one on this list is. I guess there's no category, but there's an effects string. And the idea there is that you just have a list of the things that it affects. So if an option affects the monitor and the OSD only, you would list those. Or if it affects like the common code and everything, you would say that. So it would be a list and it would match against a list. So that was the thought, instead of having to have a single category. Because it might be that, Libretto stuff affects the OSD, because USD uses Librettos to talk to other stuff for cache tiers and so on.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
It's a little. I think the only issue is that it doesn't necessarily make it easy to auto-generate the docs as much, because if you're say, here are the RGW docs, here are the RGW config options, do you list just the ones that are specific to RGW? No, I guess you want to do all the ones that affect RGW. That's going to include also all the common options that aren't RGW related at all necessarily. So.
Or do you would have more than one effect?
Yeah, exactly.
Like so if there was an item, it could be common, lib RGW.
Yeah. So that was my thought. So each option would have a list of the things it affects, and then when an actual daemon is initializing by calling common init, it would provide its list of the things that it is. So like librbd would list librbd and librettos probably, and common as its list of things, and then the config system would know that that's the overlapping set of config options are the ones that it needs to pay attention to.
Okay, so you're thinking of that categorization as being a method of figuring out which options to pay attention to, in addition to being for users to figure out what.
Maybe. I think ideally there'd be, like, there's this common pattern of people. There are a bunch of options that are prefixed with OSD that control how pools are created. Like the default crush rules is like OSD pool default crush rule or something like that, and it's used by the monitor, right? But it's confusing because it's named OSD, and so people. Right. So it'd be nice if there was a warning if you like set the wrong config option on the right thing, but I'm not sure that really works, because the way that the config options are applied, it's hierarchical. So you have to get all clever, like if the option is set on a specific OSD or under the OSD category but doesn't affect OSDs. I don't know. So maybe we just ignore that and just we could populate those fields and use them just for documentation now. But in the interest of making this something that we can actually accomplish and add value, maybe don't actually do anything with it yet. I don't know.
So what about it like a subcategory, like OSD and then subcategories Blue Store for organizing all the Blue Store ones? Or, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe there's no use of that.
That's a
Or
good
it
point.
could be a future use.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, again, we have like OSD. We probably have OSD underscore Blue Store underscore.
Yeah. We
So, I
could.
mean, is that, do you organize it by these category and subcategory regardless of the name?
Yeah.
I think this may be a little bit in the weeds in terms of like trying to get users, especially naive-ish users, or at least users that don't understand the code, to understand what it is they want to look at and what it is they might want to tweak. Really, what they need is the really hard bit of this, which is a description of what the option actually does.
Yeah.
And the reason that's really hard is you're going to find yourself explaining all the algorithms in the OSD and the peering and the monitors and all that crap just to be able to explain what this affects.
Or just marking it dev. I imagine it's going to be that's going to carve out a bunch of them.
I mean, if
that's what I was
the
going to
things
say.
that
You're just
nobody
going to
really
look
wants to
at
affect,
user
sure.
level.
Yeah.
So one thing I've noticed on the performance side is that we've got a lot of users that have a problem, right? They think things aren't going as fast as it should, and they've seen someone say, "Oh, just increase your number of OSD op threads, and that will give you a performance boost or something," And there's this kind of tribal knowledge that goes around that doesn't necessarily do anything for them, but the root of their problem might be they bought an SSD that doesn't do OD sync writes fast, or whatever. It could be millions of different things. So how do we, even if we do all of this, are we still going to have a ton of users that are just kind of wildly stabbing at changing different parameters, thinking maybe it's going to do things for them?
I mean, probably, but there's no way to like control the tribal knowledge, right? I think the best we can do is like try to get them to share it in a forum where there's some peer review, I guess. Because sort of the other thing I would like to do is try to get some of this tribal knowledge and build it into the system so that if you have SSD, then the OSD automatically increases its default op threads, right? Mm-hmm. Which is sort of unrelated to this specifically, but yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't worry if this doesn't solve all problems.
Sure. I guess what I was wondering though is what problem does it actually solve? Does it
documents the config options and it makes it clear which options users should be staying away from.
Does that actually accomplish anything? I think is what I'm asking.
Given the conversations I heard today, I think it does.
Okay.
Certainly the documentation does. Like right now we're manually maintaining, even if all we did was generate RST docs from this and that was like I think it would still be worth it because they were like manually maintaining that in a separate RST file that nobody remembers updates. Update. So
yeah.
Okay. So all right. So back to the effects thing. Maybe we could just simplify that to something like tags, and we can sort of the exact semantics of that can be TBD. But for now, we just have a simple set of like which daemon it affects or whether it's common, because that just having the tags is sort of a form of documentation where you're like, oh, this is an OSD option or whatever. And then I have two other random things here. One is that if it's a numeric value, we could define a min and a max. So you don't set like, -1 on a time value or something. Or for string options, there are a bunch of string options where it's actually really an enum, where there are like a certain specific number of strings that are recognized and others are not allowed. But it's just an option. You can set it to any string you want. So documenting what those are. And that could actually be enforced at the config time too.
Yeah, it'd be nice if things like that had validators.
Yeah. They could just have a default validator, basically. If the enum thing is a string list, then it'll just, whatever, will validate it generically. Okay.
What about C also? If you're tweaking this number, make sure you go look at what these other numbers are and tweak them in concert.
Yeah, that might make sense. I mean, that could go in the discussion, I guess, but we could have an explicit build during C also.
I don't know how many of those are, but it seems like there's a couple different groups I'm aware of. And there's only 1,240 options, so there must be a few.
Yeah. Yeah, they're often like pairs of options or sets of 3 or whatever that go together. So that would be good. Okay. Okay, so for the config levels, if it's user, expert, and dev, is user the right term, or is it like admin? I don't know.
I would say admin, not user.
Yeah. Admin, expert, and
expert's a little bit tricky. I read somewhere that possibly in the context of documentation that it's a word to be avoided because it has strangely loaded meanings.
What about advanced?
But I don't have a good alternative.
Advanced is good.
So what about like basic, advanced instead of, I don't know, admin? It's not in the it's like not the first. I don't know.
I used to like dangerous as a word.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe basic, advanced, and dev. Better thing. I don't know. Well, okay. So regardless, then we need to configure.
Is that really the messaging we want, though? Or is it more like options that you should set, options that you might need to set if you have something weird and yeah, maybe.
I mean, that's kind of what
standard and complex.
Yeah. We could have required like mon host, and then basic and advanced.
Well, no, it's more just like either these are values that they should know. I guess I just don't really get the difference between basic and advanced. Like dev is obvious, and I'm not sure. Like, okay, things you should only use if you're testing the system and are trying to break it. But
okay, so option RGW print continue, RGW print prohibited content length, RGW op thread timeout. Like these are things that normal users should never touch, right? But they're configurable for a reason because there is a circumstance where it does make sense to change them.
Maybe advanced is uncommon.
Yeah, basic and uncommon, standard and uncommon.
Where
benign, mostly harmless, and dangerous.
I want something that scares people away.
Yep.
For the advanced one. So.
Yep.
Here there be
standard
dragons.
And environmental.
Pointy.
Sharp. Yeah.
Localization. There are localization options to your environment rather than.
Yeah.
No. Localization is languages.
Ah.
Okay. Sorry, one sec. I'm leaving tomorrow, so I don't need to write. Thank you. Yeah, I'm worried that we're overthinking this. Like maybe expert isn't the idea of advanced instead of expert. That seems simple enough. You usually don't want to change the advanced options unless you really know what you're doing. And then basic.
So guys, if you look at Google Chrome, for example, it hides a whole bunch of stuff under show advanced settings button.
Okay.
What scares me about that is I always go into the Google Chrome advanced settings and screw around with stuff.
Yeah, but that's you, and you know what you're doing, right? The job is, it's not that we want to prevent people from changing them. We want them to know that they're in dangerous territory.
Yeah.
That's all. So, like, what SSL or what the RGW DNS name for your wildcard DNS, like that's a basic option. That's just something that a normal user is going to set. And if you can think about it, if somebody has to go in and change an advanced option, that's sort of like a failing on our part that we couldn't do it automatically or something, right?
That's fair. That is good to categorize things that really should change, right? That should be set.
Yeah, like your blue star cache size. That's not an advanced option. That's something you need to configure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're talking about like just that one thing, yes, you're right.
So does it make sense to have a required annotation? Like maybe not. There are only like two options. Like monhost is the only required option, I think, right? So maybe not.
Blue star cache
Well,
size.
it's only required some ways, right? So
Yeah, and it's not always required. Yeah.
no, don't do that.
Okay. All right. Basic, advanced, and dev.
I guess some systems have support options where you're really only like they're configurable. You're only supposed to do that if you get instructions from someone. Maybe I don't know if that's what we want instead of advanced, or
Yeah.
It could be that we're arguing about the conflating dev and advanced too. Maybe advanced options are those you should only do on the advice of the developer.
There are things like failure injection that like deliberately make the code misbehave so you can like test it. Those are the ones I think that are like dev only.
Yeah, I get they're a different category, but in practical terms, in terms of the user choosing whether or not he should touch this, I don't know.
Okay, well, so the other part of this was to have a config option that basically controls will prevent you from changing things above a particular level. So by default, that would be set to basic, I guess. So like max config level equals basic means that if you go and set an advanced option, it'll just issue a warning and ignore it. I can't tell if that's a good idea. It's sort of like in like the Cisco iOS or whatever the hell operating system, you have to type enable before you can like change a bunch of stuff. Something sort of akin to that. Is that a good idea? Does that make sense to people?
I think so. And in a production release, I mean, our releases, we could make it that you have to it'll say something about you can't set this higher unless support tells you to. If we wanted.
Yep, and this is the sort of thing that would go in like a Ceph-mon report too, or Ceph report. So you'd see. I guess you would see it already, but yeah.
Would the goal of the level be to prevent accidental things or prevent malicious things?
It's just a guardrail. You can't prevent malicious things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in order to set these options, you just have to set max config level advanced and then set the advanced option. Like it's not like you're preventing them from doing it. You're just making sure they've like made an explicit acknowledgement that they're going out of the.
Yeah. It's more or less the same thing as what we already have with the whatever our crazy experimental.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, that would probably be an advanced option, for example. Before you can set that.
Yeah, we should definitely name this option. Yes, I really mean it.
Yeah. So, yeah, what should we call it? I wrote down max config level because that's the only thing I could think of, but I'm not sure I like that name.
There was a situation where someone actually did yes, I really mean it and didn't mean to, right? I seem to remember. Full deletion.
Not that I know. I don't remember a case like that, but I'm sure it's happened. Like because you put it in a script and then you don't use it, right?
Yeah.
Config mode.
Yeah. Config mode equals basic advanced dev. Okay. Well, we can always change that later, but that works for now. And then the last piece of this.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. +1. Yeah. So the last piece of this is just a bunch of new ASOC commands that show this stuff. So we already have config show, get, and set. I think there's a pull request that does a config diff, but it hasn't merged. I think it needs to be rebased and cleaned up. But it basically just only shows the config options that differ from the default.
Are we
But
currently
hopefully,
storing the default and current separately?
it's in the code. The compiled version knows what the default is, obviously, so it would just go through its options and compare the option to the default option and only print it if it was different.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely want something like that for support.
Yeah. Yep. And it's like just an easy way to dump your config, but only dump the important parts. Right now, when you dump your config, you get like 300 lines of crap. Okay, so but then the new commands would be config help, I think, which would just show just the config options. Maybe just the ones that are captured by your config mode, unless you specify a particular mode. So you could do config help, and it would show just the basic options if you're on basic. Or you could even maybe specify config help and then advanced, and it would show just the advanced options or things below that. And that would be like either JSON if it's JSON, or it'd be something sort of formatted nice so you could see it. Oh, good, there's a PR there. And I guess we don't need level because that would be config set config mode basic. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was what I had. Any other suggestions, comments?
Not too bad. Out in just under an hour.
Yes. Patrick's done. Anybody else?
So there's no, if you want to know what mode you're in, you can do that. You have that there. Or was that what config mode would tell you what mode you're in?
Yeah. I mean, my thought was config mode would be an actual option. So it would be like config show would say config mode equals basic. In your Ceph file, you'd say config mode equals advanced. And then if that was set, then you could set up, it would pay attention to the other ones.
Okay.
That was my thought. And maybe we could just make sure that config show always shows config mode. Well, I guess that would be a basic option, so it would always show up anyway. And put it at the top. Okay. Somebody just put level equals advanced. Does that mean you think that the default for config help should include advanced options?
No, just that if the normal default is basic, then you might want to get help on advanced by specifying advanced.
I see. Yeah. So I was thinking that if you do config help with no argument, it would show whatever is below your current mode threshold. And if you added an argument, then you could say config help advanced, and it would include everything up to advanced, or config help dev, and it would include everything up to dev.
Right.
So I guess it would be, mode equals advanced or dev or whatever. Okay. So some of this is all optional, like min and max and enum and stuff like that. I think do that later. I think the first pass is just to like document them. Then there'll be some annoying script to generate RST and then wire that into the Ceph docs generator Jenkins job. Hopefully I can talk somebody else into doing that.
Just grab what's in the current RSTs, right?
It would generate.
Like right now, just grab what's in the RSTs to populate this that would then regenerate the same RST, something equivalent to what we have now.
I'll probably use the RST to put this to make the initial pass of this, but the goal is to have it documented in the header file, in the config ops header file. It would be right there with the config option. So it would be impossible to add a config option without writing the documentation, basically.
Right. I'm just saying you're going to steal the text from the RSTs and then put it into your new, into the source. You're moving it from the doc into the source, and then it regenerates the doc.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Cool. Okay. Anything else? Any other topics people want to discuss?
Briefly on the config options, do we have a way to mark options deprecated?
No, that is a very good idea. So we could add a tag deprecated, or we could have a bool, like bool deprecated.
As long as you're doing a sweep.
Yeah.
Maybe tied into that, should we somehow issue warnings when something is set that we don't recognize?
Yeah. There is code to do that, but we never see it. I can't remember why. But yeah. Well, bool deprecated would be good. We can certainly warn if the deprecated option is set.
Start. Do we need that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Requires restart. An option that requires a restart of the daemon rather than one that takes effect immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, bool requires restart. So, I mean, I wonder if we should use the tags for this, or we could sort of a general purpose set of Boolean values instead of adding like a separate, I don't know.
Maybe a flags.
Yeah,
just a flags field.
Yeah. Flags, so deprecated requires. I guess safe would fall into that category. Observed, which means it is explicitly. We have this sort of annoying situation right now where everything is it's unclear whether you can change it online or not. There's some that we know you can change, and and then there's everything else. So requiring restart would mean that we know which ones you can't change, but then there's still all the in between. I don't know. Eventually, hopefully, it would be only 2 sets, but right now we have 3. So it goes.
That could become a maintenance headache, I guess.
Maintaining these flags, I mean?
Yeah, keeping them in sync with real world.
Yeah. Well, the system could warn. So when everything starts up and it registers all the config observers, if you observe an option that requires restart, well, I guess that's fine. Because sometimes you still, I don't know. Yeah, it could like assert if you do that, if you wanted to.
There's a current warning that says this config is not observed. You may need to restart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that could be augmented with the ones that are tagged requires restart. It actually says you must restart. And hopefully eventually we'll get everything in both sets, but there's just a lot of code change that needs to happen before that really is a reality. Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to think about like when an option actually, after it's been deprecated and then it does go away.
Mm-hmm.
Like what if anything should happen? If we just remove it, that's fine. Or do we have it there where it might point you at another option that's replacing it, if there is one or not?
Yeah. We could have we could have a removed, and it has a C also,
right,
or something like that.
Right, exactly. So we might consider that down the line, maybe.
Yeah.
Or make sure that C also is there while it's deprecated, so that people have a chance to transition. Even
that would certainly be the case. Okay. Anything else we should talk about? Dan, do you want to mention the GUI thing briefly, just so people know it's coming?
Sure. I mean, all I've done is taken John's branch and rebased it and cleaned up a little bit of stuff and made it so that you can configure the port and address that it listens on. But there is a relatively simple JavaScript and Cherry Pie based display current status of the cluster GUI that John's put together. And yeah, like I said, I just rebased it on master and it's running today. And he's chosen to use the monitor config key options for configuration. So I've done that for the two options that I've added for listen port and listen header, which probably will want to soon have a discussion about what that namespace should look like. For right now, it's kind of akin to how the config in Ceph.conf is. The top level key is manager, and within that are the manager module name, and then within that is the option, and they're dotted at the moment, just as a convention for establishing that namespace.
Okay.
So I'll probably be sending a PR for that relatively soon.
Cool. Yeah, my personal hope is that that status screen will basically it'll be the equivalent of Ceph-S, where it is enough information that you have sort of everything you need to see about the basic status of the cluster in one sort of screen full.
It is almost literally that right now, with also the option to show the cluster log live as it updates. And there's some stuff there for looking at the Ceph-FS status of Ceph-FSs if you have them defined. What we were discussing today was the possibility of soon adding some key performance metrics, either as at least bars or as short time series graphs.
Is there any user authentication or anything in front of that?
None.
And do we care?
Maybe eventually. For now, that's why it has a config option that asks you what port to bind to, and it will be blank by default. So you have to actually set the option to turn it on.
Cool.
Yeah, and like the rest of the manager plugins, it's disabled by removing it from the plugin list.
Yep, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think read only for now, and that's probably relatively safe until we get to the point of needing auth for write.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. All right. Anything else? All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to let Patrick go now.
Thanks, all. See you tomorrow, Sage.
All right. See you guys.